Good day. Warhammer 40k is one of my favorite franchises. It's a setting filled to the brim with epic stories and deep lore, complex and compelling characters, and most importantly, it's a fun universe where 8-foot-tall badasses can cut up demons and super xenomorphs in the same bloody setting. Warhammer 40k started life as a spin-off to Warhammer Fantasy and originally was the space version of that. But as time went on and its popularity rose, it managed to supplant Warhammer Fantasy, and now today it reigns supreme. In fact, Warhammer Fantasy got retooled into Age of Sigmar, which is closer, apparently, in style to 40k. Warhammer 40k is primarily a tabletop war game where you have your overpriced plastic crack fight other overpriced plastic crack. But I never got into any of that. I like the lore and the characters and not the numbers and debt. I got into 40k way back in the early 2000s and I got introduced to the universe in a rather hilarious way. Despite its middling quality, my first ever Warhammer 40k anything was Fire Warrior, where you play as a little blue Xeno trying his best to emulate the Doomslayer. The dumbness of this game aside, it had enough compelling lore that I sought out other Warhammer 40k things, such as novels. I remember the old days of going to half-price books and hunting down any 40k book I could find. One of the earliest 40k novels I found was Eye of Terror by the most British man in the world, Barrington J. Bailey, ladies and gentlemen. This novel was published in the US on June 1st of the year 2000. I read the book sometime around 2003 through 5, and at that time, finding the deep lore on 40k was not an easy prospect. Web 2.0 was a ways away, as was the wikification of media. Meaning, if you wanted to feel yourself in on the lore, you had to read actual books about it. After playing Fire Warrior, I wanted to know more about how the Imperium came to be, and more about the dark forces of chaos. I got pretty lucky, or perhaps the Emperor blessed me with his divine knowledge, as I was able to find Eye of Terror. This novel is filled with the deep lore about the Imperium and chaos, and shows the world of 40k from the highest peak of society to the lowest, and will fill in many details that a first-time reader will want to know about the setting. And it's got a pretty imaginative story to boot. Not every 40k book is going to be bolter porn, and this novel is what I like to call Weird Hammer 40k. This novel really colored my view of what 40k was supposed to be. In Weird Hammer 40k books, you have plots that are convoluted and feature just out there things like chaos demons creating matter so that ships can go faster than light. It wouldn't be until way later that I started reading books where Space Marines just blast Xeno in face. Eye of Terror is also notable for being from the era where writers in 40k tried and succeeded in bringing hard elements into a science fantasy universe. Eye of Terror reads like the writer actually knew how space bloody well worked, and the novel features a great deal of real-world logic in a world where that is in short supply. And this makes all that weird stuff in 40k all the more weird for it. Lastly, 40k was supposed to be a satire, and this has kind of gone away over the decades, but in 2000, the satirical elements still remain. They're not as in your face like, say, Judge Dredd, and some parts of Eye of Terror were written like they were written by Terry Pratchett or something, which really makes the novel stand out from all that bloody bolter porn. As far as deep lore goes, you learn about the history of the Imperium, although some of that history has depreciated over the years, so if you know nothing about 40k going in, the novel will catch you up, and the novel never just throws names at you. The novel takes place in and around the Eye of Terror, aka the Oculus Terribilis, a great big bloody hole into the warp, aka Hell. The warp is an alternate reality that hides under actual reality and is the home of demons and 4 great space gods, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Khorne, and Slaanesh. They play the great game where each one tries to conquer the entirety of the warp itself, and they spend more time fighting amongst themselves than anyone else. From time to time, they turn their gaze to mortals, and then they send their forces from the Eye of Terror into the material universe. The novel is a complex, interwoven narrative featuring numerous characters. You've got Maynard Rugolo, a rogue trader that is less a hero and more along the lines of Space Captain Jack Sparrow. The Navigator, Clyden, he's kind of a limp at first, but will gain strength throughout the novel. Lord Commander Militant Investicone and Lord Commander Militant Drang. They are rival Lord Commanders that want to show their military might by invading the Eye of Terror. The Space Marine Brother Sergeant Magrin of the Dark Angels, a great Crusade-era Space Marine that is tempted by one of the Fallen. And finally, the Foul Forces of Chaos, as embodied by the Great Inventor, a greater demon of Tzeentch, who sets the entire plot in motion. All these characters will impact one another throughout the story, and in many ways, this is kind of a deep dive into 40k in a manner similar to how Fifth Element was a deep dive into that awesome French future. The novel begins with a null ship being sent into the Eye of Terror, and they find a Chaos invasion fleet. This inspires the Lord Commander militants to want to go to war, ostensibly to show their military might and get glory. Maynard Rugolo wants to go into the Eye of Terror to make a shitload of money by trafficking in chaos artifacts. But this is where the satire comes in. He doesn't actually believe in chaos and doesn't even believe the Emperor is a god and assumes it's all just propaganda and superstition. He gets in trouble with some creditors, and after saving the space navigator Clyden, blasts off and heads to the Eye of Terror in pursuit of riches. Clyden, not being entirely idiotic, tries and succeeds in talking Rugolo out of flying straight to hell, but they get sucked in anyway, and their excellent adventure through the Eye of Terror is pretty much the lion's share of the novel, and all the Coas stuff makes for some awesome acid trip reading. The Great Inventor is the main antagonist of the novel, and he wants to increase his standing with Tzeentch, and he does this by creating matter and changing parts of the Eye of Terror into a weird bit of real space where one can travel faster than light without dropping into the warp. Oh yeah, the warp. That's how faster than light travel works in 40k. That's right, you go to hell to go FTL. It's that kind of universe. They ain't grimdark for nothing, baby. The plotline from Magron begins in the year 30,000. He was fighting evil space marines in space. Fitting. And in battle, he gets knocked off a spacecraft and drifts through the interstellar void for 10,000 years and drifts to a planet where one of the fallen, aka evil Dark Angels, lives. And the evil Dark Angel tries to tempt him into joining Chaos. Where will it all lead? Where will it all end? Find out in Eye of Terror! If you never could get into Warhammer 40k before, give this novel a try, as it has some really imaginative writing and explains everything you bloody well need to know. Each plotline gets fully wrapped up in the end. Maynard and Clyden never actually strike it rich and almost get turned into wine. Yeah, Eye of Terror, remember? Clyden gets helped by what he thinks is his mother spirit, but possibly was the Emperor. Maybe. They serve the plot by being in the right place at the right time to ensure that Magrin does not go over to the worship of chaos. This is needed so that Magrin can be available at the right time to be whisked away by a demonette and sent to stop the Great Inventor from teaming up with a bloodthirster of Khorne. Magrin shows up at a conclave between the bloodthirster and the Great Inventor. He shouts, "Blood for the Blood God!" and starts shooting, and thus war breaks out between the Great Inventor and the bloodthirster. He then gets returned to Maynard and Clyden, and the three try and escape the Eye of Terror. The Lord Militant's attack on the Chaos forces goes decently enough, but they take a crap ton of casualties. Each militant dies though. Initially, one of them wanted to keep the mission secret so as to hog all the glory, but Terra found out, and well, the militant commanders were told that they would be quickly killed at the end of the mission and be buried with all honors. The simulated matter created by the Great Inventor starts breaking down, and said Inventor goes from Greater Demon to level 1 enemy for his failure. Maynard and Clyden get picked up by one of the militant commanders, and they are told that they will have to go back into the Eye of Terror since they survived their trip and thus have more experience with it than anyone else. Oh, and if they don't, they'll be killed. Magrin doesn't fare much better, as part of his armor had Khorne symbols on it, and thus he willingly lets himself get tortured and killed. Now you might be thinking that this is all grimdark shit. Just you wait. Turns out everything in this plot was a plan by the Emperor in the first place. This was done to stop the greater machinations of Tzeentch and Khorne, but then it turns out that an even greater demon of Tzeentch had manipulated the Emperor. Hey, I'm just reading what was written here. Put that bolter down. Apparently, this was part of a gambit by the Emperor to become a 5th Chaos God that would impose order upon the other 4. Hey, put that plasma pistol down. I'm just reading a book here. Calm down. Holy crap, is this a good bloody book. This is some high-tier literary shit in what is effectively a novel to sell plastic crack. This is by far one of my favorite novels in all of 40k, just because of how well written it is. Like, this is a novel that should be able to compete with books like Dune or the Hyperion Cantos. It takes 40k seriously and puts a realistic spin on what is normally just dudes in armor shooting at each other with rocket guns. I especially like how the writer went out of his way to explain and justify all the coincidences and convenient strokes of luck. The action, while limited in the novel, is where it needs to be, and I like novels where the characters tell the story instead of the big guns. Now, for my 40k lore hounds, yes, some of this lore has been retconned, but not much. Meltagons are not pistol-sized anymore, and instead are big rifles. And the big difference between this novel and current canon is Magrin. Magrin is from the Great Crusade and talks about worshipping the Impy Boy and says that when he was turned into a Space Marine, that his best education was a religious one. As we now know, due to the Horus Heresy, the Space Marines did not worship the Emperor, and that the E-Money was a full fedora tipper that hated religion as a whole, so his Angels of Death would most assuredly not be getting any religious schooling. Well, unless they were word bearers, but screw Airbus. All told, ladies and gentlemen, this novel is a priceless tome of arcane lore, and if you have not read it in a while, crack it open and bathe in the light of the Emperor. I am General Lotz, wishing you good, Trader General, and good Hereticus, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.